Chapter 11. A Nighttime Conspiracy.
"Annabelle is a bastard,"
Katlyn said in a whisper.
"I know, a real bitch,"
Haille said.
No. I mean she is illegitimate."
Haille sat on one of the beds set against opposite walls. The sheets were stiff and coarse, and the blankets gave off a musty odor as he settled down on them. He thought over what Katlyn had said and what they had seen in the receiving hall.
"I've never thought about it, but Lord Chastain did die years ago, before we were born." "Precisely. Annabelle is probably the offspring of her mother and one of her lovers. It's why she is not treated as a full member of the family, but she is not quite the status of a servant either.
Then why send her to the academy at all?"
"It's a game of investment and status, Haille. Who doesn't want their children, even illegitimate ones, educated so as to make a better spouse to marry off to another house? You should appreciate this. You are a noble."
"I am also a freak and a cripple. I never imagined I would be married off." They both were silent for a few moments. Then Haille continued.
"So Annabelle is treated like the help in her own home, which makes her all the more insufferable when she is at the academy."
Katlyn sat down across from Haille, running her hands through her hair and playing with the ends.
"She must be incensed to see us here. Now we know her secret."
A knock at the door silenced them both. Haille could see his own relief mirrored in Katlyn's face when two girl servants entered without Annabelle. One carried a tub, the other a kettle of hot water and lard soap. Haille decided the chivalrous thing to do was to let Katlyn bathe first. The servants stood outside in the hallway with him, neither of them looking at him or saying a word. After what felt like a long and awkward wait, Katlyn and he traded places. By the time they both had bathed and changed clothes, they were supplied with black and burgundy tunics and trousers as fitting for the house of Chastain. More servants brought them candles and dinner from the scullery. If their accommodations were plain and basic, at least the food was not. A whole chicken had been killed and cooked on their behalf. It was soaked in a buttery garlic sauce, served with roasted potatoes and rosemary. Despite the circumstances, it was the best meal Haille had eaten since leaving the Antis castle. By the way she licked her fingers, he guessed the same was true for Katlyn.
"I doubt our friends are eating as rich a feast,"
Haille said, picking up a drumstick and looking at it. Katlyn was rolling a hot potato in her fingers. She put her free hand to her forehead and sighed.
"I had not thought about that. You are probably right."
She put the potato back down on the plate.
"We should ask that the rest be served to them."
Haille stared at the half-finished chicken, the potatoes with the skin crisp and golden, and swallowed the saliva gathering in his mouth. "You are right." The serving girls who came to collect their leftovers said they would share them with the other guests. Haille's eyes followed the drumstick on the platter as it left the room. There was not much to do after eating besides sleeping. They both crawled into their respective beds. Haille felt slumber coming quickly, despite the hardness of the mattress and the odor of the blankets. It was a bed, after all, and more comfortable than the cold ground. Just as his mind was beginning to loosen itself from consciousness, Katlyn spoke up.
"Haille, there is something I didn't tell you."
He could hear her shift under the covers to face him. He contemplated feigning sleep, but thought better of it. Katlyn would be able to tell if he was faking anyway. "What is that?" he asked.
"It may be my imagination, but when we were riding up to the manor today, I thought I saw the elk."
Haille was thankful for the darkness, for she could not see him roll his eyes. "Probably just a deer."
"Maybe, but what if he is following us? I'm sure he is not. It's probably leagues away by now."
"I guess you are right," she said, fluffed her pillow, then rolled over to sleep. Haille was awoken by a sharp tap on the shoulder. It felt as if he had only been asleep for a few minutes. The room was still as dark as the inside of a barrel. "What is it, Katlyn?"
"I'm not Katlyn."
Haille sat up. He knew the voice even if he could not see the speaker's face.
"Annabelle?" "Yes, now keep your voice down."
He heard her turn. She was wearing boots that clonked on the floor beneath them.
"Ow,"
Katlyn said.
"Haille?"
"It wasn't me. It was Annabelle here." Katlyn was not as lost for words as he.
"What do you want?"
she asked.
"I want you to shut your mouth and keep your voice down,"
Annabelle said. That was the Annabelle Haille was used to. but she surprised him with her next words.
I'm getting you out of here.
Haille did not tarry. He sat up in bed and felt in the darkness for his clothes. Katlyn was more suspicious.
Why would you help us? Because it helps me,
Annabelle hissed in the darkness.
You escape. Your companions,
she said the word with a level of derision usually reserved for drunks and criminals,
kidnap me and my mother will learn to appreciate me more.
They're not kidnappers, Haille said, confused.
No, she wants us to fake her kidnapping and frame them,
Katlyn said.
It will get her attention, which is what you want, isn't it? Favor, I like to call it.
Haille didn't care about word choice. He had put his clothes on and was growing impatient.
Well, let's go. You are willing to frame our friends?
Katlyn said.
We'll worry about that later. Let's just get out of here.
No, Katlyn said.
What happens to our friends when we get caught? You won't be. I'll escape,
Annabelle said.
Heroically, I suppose, Katlyn said. What if we are caught before then? Then you will find out if the word of a prince is worth something, Annabelle said.
Can we stop talking about escape and escape already? Haille said, moving to the door. Annabelle snorted and swept past him into the corridor. Haille and Katlyn followed. They took a different path than the one they had come by. Annabelle led them down an unfamiliar set of stairs that, after switching back and forth between a number of flights, opened outside through a heavy door that Annabelle unlocked with a ring of keys. In the starlight, Haille could see that she was dressed for travel with riding boots, breeches, and a traveling cloak. She even had a satchel slung over her shoulder. She led them to a row of squat side buildings set away from the main manor. These were workshops, smithies, glassblowers, bottlers, and other craft houses found on the premises of any large manor. When they came to a set of buildings with bars on the window, Haille knew they had come to the jail. Annabelle opened the groaning door with another key from the ring and hissed into the darkness.
Get up!
Either they had not been sleeping, or the noise from the door had awakened them, but Val and Cody were quick to clamber up to the middle of the cell, a rattle of chains and the shuffle of straw accompanying them.
We're escaping,
Katlyn whispered into the cell. This is a change of fortune, Val said, but Annabelle was cursing under her breath.
They chained you,
she said. That is what they do to prisoners, Cody said.
I don't have a key to these,
Annabelle said, lifting the rusty chains in her hands. Have you a hammer or an axe? Val asked.
I do.
They all turned to the doorway. The stars were eclipsed by the massive shape of a man with broad shoulders that came close to touching either jam. In his right hand hung a battle axe, the blade gleaming in the dim light. His bushy beard and shaggy hair were unmistakable. Garn. Haille was sure they were lost. The giant of a man stepped inside the cell and closed the door behind him. His left hand was holding an oil lamp which he turned up. A gold light illuminated all of their faces, and Haille could see they wore expressions as varied as their backgrounds. Annabelle had prepared the defiant face of the privileged, ready to cower the man if he interfered with her plan. Katlyn's eyes were wide with fear. Cody blinked in the light and looked askance at Val, who in his turn looked mildly amused at the unexpected turn in the already unexpected events. Perhaps he was not scared because he read the same pleading look in Garn's face that Haille did. It was not the look of an executioner, but rather a supplicant. Garn's eyes were trained on Haille. He cast his face down to the straw strewn about the floor of the cell and set the axe down while he went to one knee. My prince, I do not know the proper words. I am but a simple man of the earth, a farmer. I ask your pardon for my role in detaining you, and I beg you for a favor. Please know that my heart is humble, my request desperate, and if you fulfill it, my life is yours. Haille felt the gaze of the others fall on him. As an unpopular, stigmatized prince, he was unused to such deference. He was completely unprepared, caught unawares as he was in a cell in the middle of a jailbreak. Could the night become any stranger? It could. My daughter is ill with a sickness no healer can cure, Garn continued. I beg of you to put your healing hands upon her. Healing hands? The shaking sickness, Val said, rearranging his chains. It is believed in some parts that those with the shaking sickness can see the future and cure ailments. More than that, the prince is stormborn. There are legends that talk of a stormborn healer, Garn said. Haille was sure these were banned legends, banned beliefs.
These are superstitions,
Annabelle said, but was silenced by a poke from Cody. I know these lands, sire. I can help you flee, Garn said.
What will you do when the Chancellor realizes you betrayed her?
I do not care. I will lay down my life, if only to help my daughter.
Haille knew he wanted to save himself, to escape the manor, and continue to the font to be healed himself, and he would say anything to do so. I'll do my best, he said. Haille, you can't promise, Katlyn protested, but Cody covered her mouth with his hand, his chains jangling on his wrists. Annabelle looked relieved, her plan still intact, if altered. Val's expression was one Haille could not read. As soon as Haille had agreed, Garn stood and picked up his axe. You'll have to strike true and once, Val said, lifting his wrists. A number of blows will alert the whole manor. You needn't worry, Garn said. Pull the chains over that brick. Val and Cody obeyed, drawing the slack over a loose brick in the floor. Katlyn moved the lantern closer to shine light on the target. Garn did not even take a practice stroke. With the certainty of a smithy, he brought the axe down on the chains and popped the brick apart. It's an improvement, Val said, shaking the broken links loose even though the manacles remained on his wrists. I'll second that, Cody said. They dimmed the lantern once more and made for the stables, where they found that the sleepy-eyed stable boys had prepared horses for all of them but Garn. How did they know? Haille asked. I told them to, Annabelle said. They follow my orders without question. Now we just need one, she looked at Garn, large horse. The stable boys rushed to saddle another horse. Val and Cody took the opportunity to search for ways to arm themselves. Cody settled for a hammer he found hanging on the wall of the tack room. Val broke the blade off a scythe and spun the handle like his old staff. It will have to do, he said. As the stable boys brought Garn's horse, Annabelle called the boy closest to her over. Give me your hand. He did, and in a flash she drew a dirk from beneath her cloak and cut a gash across his forearm. The boy cried out and curled into himself, cradling his injured arm. Hush, you will live, Annabelle said. If anyone asks, tell them she did it while you tried to rescue me, she said, pointing at Katlyn. They will treat you like a hero. Katlyn was not afraid to show her own displeasure. Annabelle made a noise with her tongue, then turned to the stable boy she had just wounded. Now open the gate. Chapter 12. Hunted. Annabelle was right. The stable boy obeyed and opened the gate without even pausing to bandage his arm. Val suggested that they release the rest of the horses into the orchards to slow down Vondales and his men once they discovered they were missing. The other stable boys looked at him with crossed arms and knotted brows, as they would likely be the ones to retrieve the horses too. But one harsh word from Annabelle and they began opening stalls and slapping the hindquarters of the remaining horses, driving them out of the stables. The group rode their mounts hard into the night, racing down the lane of oaks with arching branches, clambering downhill towards the main town, pounding through the sleepy streets out into the farmland beyond. They crossed through alfalfa beds, skirted empty marketplaces, and swept down narrow lanes, all in effort to confuse their pursuers and take shortcuts where Garn recommended. He was in no mood to tarry and cared not if they trespassed, transgressed, or endangered themselves. His sole purpose was bent upon saving his daughter at all costs. By morning, Haille's entire body was a study in discomfort. His fingers ached from clutching the reins, his arms from holding them up. His legs were beyond fatigue. His rump was sore, and to add insult to injury, his stomach was panged with hunger. He wished he had grabbed a pear or an apple or even a bunch of grapes from one of the vineyards or orchards they had crashed through in their flight. The sun rose, a pumpkin wrapped in lavender, and they rode right into its slanting morning rays. The land had changed, and so had the structures built by people. Rolling hills had been replaced by flat, featureless expanses of fields, estates by humble daub and wattle cottages, the hay barns and stables for animals outnumbering the buildings for people. Lines of trees marked the borders of property, and where there were not trees, walls of piled stones did so. The farms were spread out over great distances, and long periods of riding passed in which they saw no farms and sometimes not even cultivated fields. Instead, they rode through meadows filled with wild grasses, their stalks bending with the weight of morning dew. It was close to noon when they reached the Tavner River and their first setback.
The covered bridge was submerged, lifted off its moorings by the recent rains. It rested downstream, only its roof rising out of the muddy water. "Damn it to hell!" Garn said, yanking the reins with a clenched fist, spinning his horse. Locals had improvised a ferry with a rowboat and a rope strung across the width of the river. Villagers had gathered, waiting on either side to cross with their goods for the market. They regarded Garn and his outburst in wary silence. "Is there another way?" Val asked. "A ford to the north, but the water will be too high. We best head to Whistleby, the next town to the south. There's a ferry. I know the owner. He can get us across with the horses." "Then it's south we go," Val said, shooting a glance at Annabelle, who had dismounted and was bartering with a woman, trying to trade a few pears from her satchel for fresh bread. Fruit was plentiful this time of year, so she was not making headway. "Come on, girl, no time to waste," Val said, riding his horse between Annabelle and the village woman.
"But we've covered so much ground and we've ridden all night."
"Indeed, and now we have been seen, and these folks won't soon forget this sight." Sight was working against them, but not as badly as scent. They had been traveling along the banks of the river and were passing through curtains of willow branches when the ears of the horses twitched and Haille felt his mount shiver beneath him. The howling of wolfhounds rose up not far from them. "Do you think those dogs are after us?" Cody asked. "No doubt," Val said. "We need high ground." "Hard to find in a floodplain," Cody said, whipping a bunch of willow branches over his shoulder. "Then we ride," Val said, kicking his horse. They rode at a gallop to the edge of the trees and along a barley field waiting for harvest. Haille wondered what strength his own mount had left, an older mare which had been favoring her left back leg. Val must have been thinking along similar lines, for he pointed across the barley field to a thatched roof. "Let's go," he said. They trampled their way through the field, making no effort to hide their path. If the wolfhounds had their scent, it did not matter anyway. Katlyn was the weakest rider of them all. Not a soldier or a noble, she was not trained to ride. Haille didn't even remember seeing a stable of a donkey at her family's home. He fell back to ride alongside her. The saddle was crashing into her with each stride of her stallion. Her hair was loose and plastered across her forehead with sweat. When she tried to push it out of her face, she nearly fell from the saddle. Haille pulled his own horse to stop and leaned over, grabbing the bridle of Katlyn's. Gray shapes were moving about in the willows they had just left. He loosed his feet from his old mare and swung onto her stallion, shifting Katlyn forward in the saddle and wrapping her in one arm. "Hold on," he said, and kicked the horse. The stallion was better suited for him and was not injured like his mare. Katlyn bounced at first, sliding about in the saddle. "Post with your legs. Go up when the horse goes up." She caught on well enough, and they gained on the others who were riding clear of the field to the thatch building. It was a weather shelter for field hands with walls on only 3 sides. A long table waited underneath with a half-dozen benches surrounding it. Fresh pieces of chopped wood lay stacked on the hearth of the fireplace, and barrels of fresh water lined the far inner wall. "Haille, Katlyn, Annabelle, in the rafters," Val said. Haille rode into the shelter, the stallion's hooves clumping on the flagstone floor. He helped Katlyn slide off onto the table. Cody bounded up beside her and lifted her into the rafters, where she took hold and perched between joists. He did the same for Haille and even Annabelle. When Annabelle was secured, Cody smiled at her, that same good-natured and handsome smile he had used on the crowd in Kinth. "My lady, could I trouble you for that dirk of yours? A man might need it against dogs that have run a whole night on empty stomachs." Something came over her, her eyes fluttering, her cheeks reddening. She drew the knife and dropped it to his waiting hands. "Thank you, my lady," Cody said with a slight bow. The tables crashed as Val and Garn turned them on their sides and slid them into place as a bulwark against the coming dogs. They stacked benches on top and left a small gap in the center to draw the dogs through. It was not a minute too soon, for the first of the wolfhounds rushed around the corner, spooking the horses and charging for the shelter. These were long hounds with high shoulders and snapping, foamy mouths, crossbreeds from wild wolves and hunting hounds. Their fur was gray with streaks and patches of black, and they had grown mad with the chase. The first came snarling into the gap, followed by more than a dozen that leapt into view from around the corners of the shelter, their nails scraping up the dirt and scratching up against the tipped table. Garn met the first one with his axe, nearly cleaving its head from its body. Annabelle and Katlyn screamed. There was no respite. The other hounds streamed in after the first, leaping the headless body. Garn swung and hacked, and soon was covered in blood like a butcher. Val, armed with just his broken scythe handle, spun it like an archmaster, turning the shaft of wood into a precise and beautiful weapon. He took wide swings, building momentum before striking one dog after another, some dropping unconscious, others staggering back too dizzy to continue the fight, their tails between their legs, their ears back. When one dog caught the shaft in its teeth, Val surprised it, pushing the shaft down in between two flagstones. He vaulted over the beast, twisting the shaft free, then sweeping the dog's legs. A more brazen hound leapt to the top of the overturned table and tried to clamber over. Cody took a log from the hearth and used it like a battering ram to send the dog flying backwards. It fell, but another took its place. This one cleared the table and landed upon Cody, but he sunk Annabelle's dagger into its neck before its jaws reached him. Still the animals kept coming, all snapping jaws and tearing claws. Val swung his shaft from the end like a long sword into the floor and it broke in half. He tossed one end to Cody in time for Cody to conk another dog on the skull. Then the table literally turned, the hounds pushing a gap open next to the wall and scrambling around. "Look out!" Haille cried, but it was too late. 3 dogs jumped on Garn while he was still trying to free his axe from a dying one. One scratched a gash in his face, and another sank its teeth into his forearm. Cody leapt to his aid, Annabelle's dagger flashing red. Val was cornered by 2 ferocious males. Haille readied himself to drop from the rafters and join the fray when Garn spun around and slammed the dog against the floor. It loosed its mouth long enough for Garn to free himself, take its jaws in his hands, and hold them apart while Cody finished the beast. Something shifted after that. There were more dead dogs than live ones, and the ones living were wounded. The floor was awash with bright red arterial blood. Val chased the last of the dogs away, his stick whooshing in the air. Cody helped Garn to sit down on the hearth. "Easy, friend, it looks like they took a big piece of you." It was no exaggeration. Garn's sleeve was torn, and through the rows of ragged gaps, blood pulsed out of the holes made by the dog's teeth. A puddle of his own blood was forming at his feet, and his face was pale, making the gash there seem all the more red. But Garn didn't rest. He pulled off his cloak and began cutting it into strips with his axe. "Help me wrap this," he said, handing a strip to Cody. "We must press on." Chapter 13. Whistlebee. The horses had fled, so the party made their way on foot, much to Annabelle's disdain. Nor was she pleased with the treatment of her family's hounds. "Those were my mother's prized hounds, and you slaughtered them like pigs," she said. "Maybe you didn't notice, young lady, but they were not exactly the cuddling type," Cody said. "This journey has become too dangerous. You will leave me with the chief magistrate in Whistlebee, where I will explain that I escaped from your clutches." "That won't happen," Val said over his shoulder. "Why not?" "Because if we leave you with the chief, he'll be sure to send the sheriff's men after us scurrilous outlaws," Val said. "You have to do what I say." No, I don't think I do," Val said, not breaking stride. "I released you." "Correction. You released the prince and Katlyn. Garn released us," Cody said. "Then what is keeping me from running away in the opposite direction?" she said, stopping in place so that Haille and Katlyn overtook her. "This," Cody said, brandishing her own dirk that she had given to him. "Won't be able to run too well once you're hamstrung." "Cody," Val said from up ahead where he was helping Garn over a fallen tree. Cody flipped the knife over in his hand before sheathing it with a loud snap. He stopped close to Annabelle, who waited with her arms crossed, her chin pointed up into his face. "Be advised, lass. I never took the same vows as the captain did, so I have fewer scruples than he." He ended with a flash of his smile, ingratiating and incongruous with his words. "You, sir, are no gentleman," Annabelle said, starting forward. "Sorry to disappoint." Haille savored no small amount of enjoyment at Annabelle's expense, but when he looked to Katlyn to see if she shared it with him, he saw her gaze fixed on Garn. Her face was wrought with concern as the giant shuffled forward, his bandages dark with seeping blood. Katlyn said little the rest of the afternoon, and by the terse way she did speak to him, Haille realized she was angry with him. He could not imagine why, but decided it must have been something feminine and inconsequential. He slinked to the back of their group to walk alongside Cody, who was more than happy to chat about Val's exploits during the War of the Caswell Isles. I remember during a night raid, the captain once tricked a battalion of Arthurian soldiers into sacking their own supply train.
How did he do that?
Well, there is no limit to ingenuity when you're outnumbered. Deception becomes your best weapon.
Like wearing a dress?
Cody snorted and spat. The captain will do what is necessary for his men. Always has. Always will. It is why they would rather eat their own hearts than risk disappointing him. They knew they were nearing Whistleby when cottages and straddle barns appeared with more frequency. There was enough foot traffic on the main road that Val thought it safe for them to make their way along it, blending in. This was also easier for Garn, who was woozy from blood loss. Haille noticed that the big man's pace had slowed throughout the day and only picked up slightly when they neared Whistleby. They stopped outside the town and sat down to rest in a cemetery surrounded by drooping willows and crooked cypress trees. The wind made a soft whistle in the branches, and summer-fattened spiders spun shining webs in the windows of crypts and in between headstones. In the afternoon sunlight, it was almost a pleasant place to stop and rest. But Garn was not ready to wait. My friend who also owns the ferry also owns a tavern in town. I will find him there. Shall we go together? Cody asked. He and Val both studied Garn, their eyes lingering on his injuries, the sheen of sweat on his face and the grey color that had crept into his left hand below his wound. Best I go alone. They will be looking for 6 of us, not 1. Can your friend tend to your wounds? Some fresh bandages and a poultice would not hurt, Val said. Not my concern. My daughter Aurora is, Garn said, already marching between 2 willows, the long branches sliding over his shoulders like curtains. In not the space of 2 breaths since Garn had disappeared, Annabelle made a break for the cemetery gate and the main road. As if expecting it, Cody reached out, upended her, and carried her towards a crypt. The crypt, just larger than a dovecot, had a tiled roof and an iron door and small windows of stained glass. Cody opened the door with a kick. The inside was a pool of colored light. From where he sat, Haille could see bodies draped in burial shrouds, moldering on shelves, like siblings sleeping in closely clustered bunk beds. A shiver went up his spine while Annabelle screamed, kicked, and held on with white-knuckled fingers to the frame of the door. Cody overpowered her, crying out and cursing when she bit him on his hand just before he tossed her inside and slammed the door shut. Annabelle pounded and screamed from within until Val warned her, "Cry out loud enough, and you will wake the dead inside there with you." There was silence, followed by a small peep. "Will I?" "Well, you can't be too sure," Cody said, shaking out the hand she had bit. Even Annabelle, with her city education, harbored some superstition, or at least ignorance, and stopped her screams. They were soon replaced by soft weeping. Haille was rather enjoying himself and wanted to congratulate Cody with a slap on the back, but he and Val were in no mood for celebrating. Instead, they sat down on tomb markers across from Haille, staring him straight in the eye with long faces, Val's jaw working slowly on a blade of grass. "Now we need to determine what to do with you," Val said. Haille swallowed. "Me? You're not going to put me in a crypt, are you?" "What they mean is that you promised Garn you would cure his daughter, Aurora," Katlyn spat, her anger boiling over. Belatedly, Haille realized why she had been sour towards him all afternoon. "What are you going to do, young prince, when we reach his homestead and your powers to heal are nil?" Val said, his gaze unflinching. Even Cody, who had been so jovial earlier that afternoon, now looked at him with narrow eyes and tightly set lips. "Well, I hadn't really thought of it. I guess I thought we would escape before that." He wanted to add that perhaps this was a good time to do so, but somehow thought better of making the suggestion. "The man risked his life for us, for you. He's bled for us," Val said. "And those are no superficial wounds," Cody said. "I've seen men die from less." "He risked his life for his daughter." Haille thought it was important to point out that distinction. "Whom you are supposed to save. A man's word is his life is his word," Val added. Haille looked to Katlyn for support, but by the way her jaw was set and her arms were crossed, he knew he would find no sympathy with her. "I don't see how you can act with so much superiority, Cody," Haille said. "You just shoved a girl into a crypt."
And she will only be there as long as she does not realize I never locked the door. She's a liability, but she's innocent in her own way. After we move on, I'm sure she will eventually calm herself and find her way home. Now you, on the other hand," Cody stopped short as Val put his hand on his shoulder. They all heard the same sound, horses pounding along the main road. On instinct, all four of them crouched down in the overgrown grasses and wildflowers. Through the gate of the cemetery they watched a cadre of riders pass. Vandales, with his unmistakable gleaming forearms at the lead. "Decision time, Highness," Val said when nothing was left of the riders but a cloud of dust in the road. "They are headed to town, Haille. We can't leave Garn. Someone has to warn him," Katlyn said. "We can't all go," Val said. "Fine," Haille said, standing up. "I'll go." Already weak and tired from their long flight, Haille could only manage a feeble jog towards Whistleby. But at least on foot he did not have to stick to the main road as Vandales and the men did. Instead he snuck through woods and approached the town from behind, passing between cottages on winding back lanes and even cutting through a few yards where he ducked under billowing lines of laundry. No one stopped him, but a few children stared, recognizing a stranger in their midst. As hard as he pushed, his body seemed unwilling to cooperate, his limbs limp and heavy. He even stopped to lean against a tree at one point, fighting dizziness and a growing sense in the back of his mind that something was seriously wrong. A man's word is his life. He had to reach Garn first. He approached the main market street from a side alley, stepping into a deep puddle that soaked his boots through, but that did not matter as much as simply pushing forward one step in front of the other. He slowed at another corner and took a cursory glance at the street. It was busy with women selling vegetables, children playing, and men rolling barrels off wagons. If Vandales and his riders had reached the town yet, they would still be on the far side. A bit of luck. Horses lined up at a trough outside, and the weary notes of a fiddler drifted out into the street, playing a relaxed, sad melody. Haille limped across the gallery boards and stepped inside. It was dark and still too early in the afternoon to light candles or lanterns, so he waited for his eyes to adjust while the smell of pipe smoke, fried onions, and roasted pork assaulted his nose. The smell of food alone filled his mouth with spit. He tried to tell himself his symptoms were from hunger and fatigue alone, although already he was afraid they were something more. "You all right, son?" asked a man in an apron with a barrel of ale on his shoulder. "I'm looking for Garn." "Don't know him." "Is this tavern owned by the same man who owns the ferry?" "No," he said, setting down the barrel on the counter and pounding a spout through its bunghole. "You're looking for the tavern on the other side of town?" Haille nodded. "Thank you." "You sure you're all right?" Fine, was all Haille could muster. He stepped outside, his head beginning to spin. There was no denying it. He knew exactly what was happening now. The paralysis gripping the left side of his body, the metallic taste in his mouth. He was in the beginning stages of a seizure. He clutched at his bite pellet with his fingers. With all the fatigue, the trauma, the lack of sleep, it was a wonder he had not experienced one sooner. He was not sure how long he leaned against the column of the gallery. His sense of time often went with his seizures. He could have been there an hour or just minutes. But after remembering the danger he was in, he pushed himself up the street. His head was beginning to pound between his eyes, and an aura blurred the edges of his vision. He held his pallet with his left hand now and leaned against the passing buildings with his right. He even heard horsemen ride past and could have sworn he saw the flash of Vandale's gauntlets. But they were looking for 6 people, not one sick boy teetering as if drunk. "Spread out," he thought he heard Vandale say in his strange accent. Finally, Haille grabbed onto the door of a building that sounded like a tavern. He could hear the bright din of voices and clinking goblets. He could smell ale, lantern smoke, and cooking oil. He knew, or hoped, he was there. A woman, her face painted with rouge and wearing a red dress with lace up to her neck, stepped up next to him in the doorway where he was leaning. "Boy, what is wrong with you?" she asked. "Gone. Looking for Garn." "Don't know who that is." "Talking to the man who owns the ferry, the man who owns the tavern." "Finn? Well, he's upstairs. Why don't you sit down? You're not a cripple or something, are you?" Haille was having trouble speaking as the muscles in his face and neck were contorting. He pushed past the woman towards a set of stairs and started up them, leaning his shoulder against the wall, holding his bite plate just short of his mouth. Any moment.
I don't know what is going on, he heard the woman with the rouge say. She had a voice that was clear as a clarion bell. It floated above the noise of the patrons. He imagined her as some type of singer as her heeled boots clonked past him on the stairs. She pounded on a door at the top. Finn, there is some cripple out here looking for you. He's going to scare customers away. Haille heard a gruff voice rebuff her, but he could not understand what was said. He was 3/4 of the way up the stairs, but could not move any farther. Blackness was closing in. Gone. He says he's looking for Gone. It could have been a space of hours. It felt like it, but it was probably only seconds that passed, and the door swung open on squeaky hinges, and feet clattered down the stairs, stopping next to him. A pair of gentle hands lifted him up. Haille could not see him, but he knew Garn by his smell of sweat, willow branches, and bloody bandages. Garn, they are coming! Out the back, the voice that was Finn said. Elizabeth, you stall anyone that comes through that door. What is wrong with him? Worry about what I tell you to worry about, woman, Finn said. Garn hugged Haille against his chest, Haille's legs sticking out stiff, refusing to fold over the giant's arms. Haille could smell kitchen smoke passing over him as well as the warm yeast odor of brewing beer. It was all replaced by the smell of horses, leather tack, hay, and manure as they hurried alongside a stable out back. The sun was flashing in his eyes through colored tree leaves. Haille rolled his head and saw a face he knew but could not comprehend. Silas. Silas Bentry. He was lifting a horn to his lips, his cheeks puffed out to blow, but Garn set Haille on the ground and slammed a fist into Silas's mouth instead. The horn fell. Darkness came. Chapter 14. Aurora. He tasted copper. Blood. He tasted leather. His bite palate. He was shaking, bouncing in darkness. His eyelids too heavy to lift, but in his mind he saw fleeting images. A headstone, a crypt, a river. The sun dazzling his eyes, slipping into his consciousness like nails of light. Katlyn's face, a hand on his that could only be hers. Cody's voice, the pressing of an arm across his body. A horse beneath him, and a chest, solid, supporting him from behind. He fought the constricted muscles in his arm to lift a hand to his face and pull the pellet from his mouth. He sucked in a deep breath and opened his eyes. A chestnut horse and a black mane bouncing, a single thick arm holding the reins. The other was around him. The sun was almost set, the indigo sky awash with streaks of pink and flaming orange. A split-rail fence ran along one side of them, a stone wall and an orchard on the other. More horses were ahead of them, their riders kicking them as they galloped. Glad you could join us again, Val said from behind him. Where? Gon's homestead, he said as a cluster of buildings appeared at the end of the lane, smoke rising from the chimney and amber light spilling out the windows. Haille counted 2 other horses, one with Garn, the other with Cody and Katlyn. Young men Haille's age gathered at the gate and along the fences, meeting the group as they slowed in the courtyard formed by the farmhouse, barn, and granary. In his weary but finally clear state, Haille could read the solemn faces of the farm boys and their tear-streaked cheeks of the women who came to meet them, their heads covered in bonnets and shawls. It was not a joyous homecoming. As Garn slipped from his mount, and a tall woman, his wife, her head freshly shorn of hair, met him in the doorway, Haille knew they were too late. Garn's wife tried to embrace him, but he refused her, holding her back with one arm and beckoning to Haille with the other. Val helped him off the horse, and by the concerned look on the faces of Garn's people, Haille imagined he looked ready to pass away himself. Katlyn was at his side, propping him up as he followed Garn into the farmhouse. They walked down a hallway that ran the length of the house and past a number of empty rooms until they came to the back of the house into a sort of sun parlor with glass walls held in place by iron fretwork. Lilies, geraniums, mums, and impatiens bloomed in the warm space, despite the lateness of the season. On the far wall, in a child's bed, lay Garn's daughter. She was a thin, almost skeletal figure, but even with her narrow, stricken face, composed as if asleep, it was clear she had been beautiful. She had been cleaned so that her skin was smooth and unblemished, even if pale in death. Her hair was lovingly plaited with small mums worked into the braids like the crown of some autumnal nymph. Her hands were folded over her chest. Through the glass in the ceiling, Haille could see the stars shining in the night sky, the black ridges of the Rimker Mountains rising up to meet them.
"She wanted to be in this room for her last days,"
her mother said, her shorn head now covered in a black mourning shroud.
"She loved flowers and wanted to be able to see the trees and the stream and back. She wanted to be buried there."
"No, no, no," Garn said, genuflecting next to Haille. "Please say we are not too late. Use your healing powers." Garn guided Haille to his daughter's bedside. Her ears and nose had been stuffed with cotton to stop any drainage, and her mouth had been stuffed too, the smallest of strands sticking to the curve of her upper lip. Haille was not sure what to do or say. He felt all eyes on him, including Val and Cody's. A man's word is his life. Haille reached out a hand, held it over the body. Aurora looked as if she were just asleep, and that she might wake at any moment, pull the cotton from her ears, nose, and mouth, turn to her father, and embrace him. Haille lowered his hands, but stopped short of touching her.
"Garn, I can't. I don't."
"What do you mean?" Haille's lips moved, but no words came out. His mouth felt dry, even as a lump formed in his throat. It was Katlyn who came between them and said in a soft voice, tears dropping from her eyelashes,
"Garn, it's only a superstition. Haille is not a healer. He can't bring the dead back to life."
"But you said—"
"I said I would try, but I didn't think we would actually reach."
Garn stood up, his nostrils flaring like a bull, his feet planted wide and his lip curling. "You mean you used me? Lied to me?" Val stepped forward. There was no honor in his deception, but the boy was desperate. "I ought to kill you," Garn said, cracking his knuckles. Katlyn put her hands to her mouth. Val moved shoulder to shoulder with Garn. "He is but a child, Garn. A scared child. Not that he does not deserve some punishment, but not death. You have been good to us." "That ends now," Garn said. As if to punctuate his statement, a window in another part of the house shattered, and a farm boy came running down the corridor, pushing into the crowded room. "Garn, riders!" "It seems that we have been located," Cody said. "How many fighting men do you have here?" "Not enough," Garn said. "Everyone to the cellar. Will escape through the passageway." The women, the children, and the few men present began to move as one into the hall, through a doorway and down a set of stone stairs. "There is a way out?" Val asked. "My grandfather was a smuggler of illegal spirits. There is a tunnel that leads out beyond the orchard," Garn said as he picked up Aurora and wrapped her in a sheet. Already the floor was growing empty as the others fled downstairs, the men gathering the last of the children. Garn stood next to the door to the steps, a gatekeeper of sorts. He looked down the hallway at Haille, who had collapsed to his knees on the floor. Garn's eyes were hard and flinty. "You are welcome to flee with us, but not the boy." "He's the prince," Val said. "He can take his own chances. What do I care? My life is forfeit already," he said, a nod towards his injured and festering arm. Cody looked back and forth between them, the two men, Val and Garn, locked in one another's gaze, as if waiting for the other to break. Neither did, until at last Garn turned to Katlyn. "Lass, you told the truth. You are welcome to come with us too."
"My place is with my friend," she said.
"If that is your choice, so be it," Garn replied and pulled the door shut. He locked it from the other side and they stood listening as his feet descended the steps beyond. "Well, this is some end we have come to," Cody blurted.
"I'm sorry, everyone,"
Haille mumbled. "Sorry is no use right now," Val said, his face lit orange by a torch passing outside. He ducked down out of the light, along with Cody. "Cody, search for some weapons. We might have to settle for fighting with fire pokers and kitchen knives." "So be it," Val said. "Katlyn, Haille, to me." They followed him through the corridors to the front room. Through the windows, Haille glimpsed the riders, their steel gleaming in torchlight, their shouts echoing off the buildings. Cody tried a few keys that he had found in the door to the cellar, but none fit. "Worth a try," he said, tossing the keys over his shoulder. "What do you have for us?" Val asked. "A fire poker, a frying pan, and a broomstick." Val sucked at his teeth. "None of which will help much against swords and spears." A voice called to them from outside. Haille recognized Vandale's strange accent. "Give up the prince or we'll burn you out." Cody shrugged. "Do we trust this lot?" "I trust them to burn this place down, yes. But these are not methods of a man working for the crown."
"Well, that was obvious when they sent hunting dogs to find us," Katlyn added.
Cody slid a bench across the floor and barricaded the front door with it. "Maybe we should try to break down that door to the cellar." "Have at it. It's our only chance," Val said, throwing more furniture up against the front door. Katlyn followed suit, carrying chairs and a stool and throwing them on the growing pile. Haille leaned against the meeting of two walls, pressing himself into the corner, wishing he could simply disappear from existence. He had never meant to cause so much harm or to put so many lives at risk. It was turning out to be harder to flee than he had imagined, and even harder to redeem himself from being the disappointment his father had labeled him. Who were these men? Mercenaries? Criminals? Maybe if he gave himself up, they would ransom him or even kill him. Perhaps that was what he deserved. Katlyn and Val were taking longer trips deeper into the house to retrieve more furniture to barricade the doors. Cody was smashing against the locked cellar door with a doorstop. In the chaos, it was easy for Haille to dash to a window, push it open, climb over the sill, and drop into the courtyard. He was ringed by riders immediately. In the dancing shadows, they all looked sinister and cruel. Haille was still weak, but a surge of fear gave him strength to walk out into the open, his hands raised above his head. He thought he heard Val cry for him to come back, but it was too late now. Among the riders, Haille glimpsed arms thick and hard with muscles, scars of previous battles, and pitiless, unforgiving eyes. Vandale's, this man with the misshapen hands, his own scarred face, and that tattoo curling about his scalp, rode to the fore, a smirk turning up the corners of his mouth. The broken ring around his neck caught the torchlight and glowed red as if it had just been drawn out of a fire itself. "You can have me. Just let my friends go," Haille said. "You are not in a position to negotiate," Vandale said. "I am the prince, and your disappearance, even death, might be enough to start a war." He smiled. "Take him. Kill the others." This was not how things were supposed to happen. Haille began to back up towards the house, where Val, Cody, and Katlyn had followed him out through the windows, but were cut off from him by the ring of riders. Vandale's closed in on him, the blades of his gauntlets flashing as he cantered in close. He opened his mouth. He was about to give some order or to gloat, but he never had the chance. Instead, Haille heard the pounding of hooves, nearing like a stallion running wild. Haille imagined it must be one of the other riders bearing an urgent message. Perhaps they had found the place beyond the orchard where Garn and his people had emerged. Perhaps the rider had lost control of his own horse in the chaos. Vandale's turned his head, his mouth still open. He only had time to raise his arm to protect his face before he disappeared in a blur of motion. There was a meat-on-meat slap, a hollow thud as the beast collided with Vandale's horse. His mount fell over, kicking its legs and neighing. Vandale's hung in the air, suspended on what appeared to be spear points and sword lances, until the image resolved itself in Haille's mind and he realized what he was seeing. An elk. The elk, with the metallic antlers. The same elk they had released, crashing through the numerous riders. It bellowed and hissed and rammed Vandale's with its antlers so that the scoundrel was perched on the points briefly before the elk tossed its head in a grand sweep and sent Vandale spinning through the air, feet to the sky, then into the side of the barn. Vandale smashed into the boards with a clatter of armor and unceremoniously dropped face first to the ground in a cloud of manure and dust. The riders tried to regroup, but their horses had gone mad, rearing and neighing, leaving opportunity for the elk to attack and unhorse more men. Vandale's, shaking his head and propping himself up on his elbow, tried to shout out orders. "Capture the elk! I want it alive!" But only chaos ensued. The horses were spooked, the men were confused, and in the tumult, Cody and Val overpowered one of the riders, took his sword and a mace, and smote down two others. Katlyn grabbed the bridles of two horses and wrestled with them, both pulling her so that her heels dragged in the dirt. Haille ran to her side and took one of the bridles in his own hand. He only had a moment to find his balance before Silas Bentry ran out at him with outstretched arms. But he did not reach Haille. The elk jumped between them and raked the ground before lowering its rack of antlers and sweeping the man aside. Another man was running at Katlyn, a curved scimitar in his hand. This time the elk was even less gentle, ramming the razor-sharp points of its rack into the man's chest. They punched through his armor, and he began coughing blood up into his beard. Vandales was up and made a dash for Haille, but Cody rode up and dropped him with a swing of his mace into his back. "That balances the ledger some," Cody said, spinning the mace in his hand. Val was already on one of the other horses. Haille mounted and went to grab Katlyn, but the elk had other ideas, snatching her collar in its teeth and swinging her, limbs flailing onto its back. Her eyes were wide as saucers as a deep voice, Val's, Cody's, Haille was not sure, called out, "Hold on!" Katlyn grabbed fistfuls of elk mane before the animal broke into a run, charged the nearest fence, and leapt over it with inches to spare. "I've lived to see strange things," Val said, then came to himself. "Come on, let's go." "Which way?" Cody asked as the riders struggled to regroup around them. "Follow the elk." Chapter 15. Avenger Red. "Slavers," Cody said from the outcropping he had stretched across. He kept his body close to the rock while he gazed into the valley ahead of them. Val, Katlyn, and Haille waited behind him. "How many?" Val asked. "Slaves. At least 3 dozen, strung out on dog lines." "Guards?" 6. 7 if you count the driver. Can't tell who might be inside that wagon. Could be more slaves. Could be slavers drunk out of their heads and sleeping it off. Too many for us to help," Val said, spitting. "Scoundrels." "We're far beyond the reaches of the ley now," Cody said, crawling back down the rock. "Outlaws behind us, slavers in front of us. I'd say it's time we held a council of war," Val said. "Agreed," Cody said, planting his feet on the ground and plucking a stray blade of grass that he slipped into his mouth the way an older man might chew on a pipe when considering weighty matters. "What is there to decide?" Haille asked. "Well, whether to continue on this quest of yours or take you back to the city where you are safe," Val said. "I can't go back. You agreed to help us. We're paying you." Val laughed, nodding at the coin purse on Haille's belt. "We've long surpassed the payment that could fit into that pouch." "I'd concur," Cody added. "You're not helping us for the money," Katlyn said. She had been stroking the elk on its face, and now the animal peered over her shoulder as she spoke. It had taken a liking to her, allowing her to ride it, even letting her sleep curled up against its side when they rested. Haille was envious, for the animal was wary of him, refusing any grass he offered and slipping away when he tried to mount. "You're helping us because you are bound. You have not forsaken your vows." "That might be true, but a man has to eat, and Cody is not a member of the Order." "Speak for yourself about a man's need to eat. A man needs more than eating," Cody said. "Just what is this Order of Oban?" Haille asked. Cody looked to Val, who shifted from one foot to another, then took a deep breath, puffing out his chest. "The Order of Oban was an order of warriors unlike any other. We were devoted to life. Whose life? All life. That is the only way to secure true peace and lasting concord. We were warriors trained to fight, but only to kill when there was no alternative. Our weapon of choice is not the sword, but the yew-staff, so that we can disarm rather than kill. For us, even the life of our enemy is sacred and must be protected, unless he leaves us no other choice." "That is where they lost me," Cody said, drawing an imaginary sword from his belt. "I prefer the sword." Val glared at him before softening his expression and shrugging. "Ours is a noble sentiment, and has saved your life many a time." "As I recall, my sword has saved yours more than a few." "True." "How can you be a warrior and try to protect the life of your enemy?" Haille asked. "Well, one way is not to make enemies, but the other is through training, discipline, self-control. Most men who enter a fight do not want to die. We just make sure we win so nobody dies. We show mercy to our opponent. Truly the only thing that can untie bitter enemies is the one thing they likewise hold sacred, their lives and the lives of their loved ones. Build on that, and you can build peace." "Sounds outlandish," Cody said. "But it builds more allies than enemies, more understanding than enmity. After all, the best way to destroy an enemy is to make him a friend," Val said. "Sounds dangerous to me," Cody said, shaking his head and looking to the sky. Haille had the sense that this was a debate going on between these two men since long before.
Is it true you were disbanded for betraying the High Council of Anthor?
You know more than you let on. Haille shrugged and jabbed a thumb in the air towards Katlyn.
She reads a lot.
It's true. We felt that the council was in the wrong. But we lost, and to the victors go the spoils.
And the history books, Katlyn added. I only learned of the Order when I was reading books that were officially banned. But what were you thinking? Haille said, astonished. Even my father has to answer to the High Council and Catastrophes. I thought they were, well, good.
Cody laughed.
The coins in your purse. The fortunes of our rulers were not won by being good. They rarely are.
Careful, else you disabuse them of their youthful dreams too quickly, Val said, studying Haille's reaction.
You have not given up on yours, Katlyn said to Val.
Some days I've tried.
But he's a stubborn fool, Cody said.
Val rubbed the whiskers on his jaw. Be at ease, Prince Haille, for your father is known to be a just ruler, a good man.
So you don't mind helping his son? Katlyn asked.
I don't mind helping anyone in need, Val said.
Lucky for you, you have gold to pay me,
Cody added. Val shook his head. But if we are to continue to help you, we need to know more of this mission you are on. Haille and Katlyn's eyes met. She nodded, and he started from the beginning, the very beginning as he saw it. His mother's death, his father's distance, the resentment towards Haille for her death, and for his own deficiencies. The hatred from the nobles, the ridicule of other children. He shared all. He had never even told his whole story before, discussed all the pain, or the darkest thoughts he had harbored. But he told it all in order to explain his hope, his desperate hope, that the font existed and that it could cure him. The story seemed persuasive, at least enough so that the two men did not laugh. To his surprise, Katlyn wiped tears from her eyes when he finished and reached over to clutch his hand. As she let go, he noticed Val and Cody both in deep thought. In the silence that followed, Haille reached into his breast pocket, removed the folded pages of the folio, and handed them to Val. His eyes roved over them, and when he was finished he handed them to Cody. After a quick glance, Cody returned them to Haille, asking,
How do you know this is the truth, and not superstition like so much else?
Some things ring truer than others, Katlyn said, her hand rubbing her upper arm. Haille had left out her story from his, and he sensed he had done right. Apparently all their secrets would not be shared in one sitting. The font is an unknown, so's the path. That means our choice is between the uncertainty of the quest versus the safety of return, Val said. Hearing it phrased so, Haille felt anxious they would have to return.
No, please, this may be my only chance. I told you about the letter my father wrote.
Val hummed, his fist to his lips.
We've seen stranger things in our travels, Cody said.
Val nodded. Katlyn patted the elk.
And we've gained an ally. He fights like a beast of legend.
That he does, Val said. The cautious council says we should turn back. However, those riders wait between us and the city. There is conspiracy and treachery afoot, and doing the unexpected might be what is best.
We'd be safe in Rivertown,
Haille said.
Yona has friends there still at River Ridge Manor.
Val let out a long stream of air between his lips. Every old man yearns for safety, every young man for adventure, and every son yearns for the approval of his father above all else. If there is only one chance to set that right, I say we go east. Haille leapt off the stump and pumped his fists. Just as he did, a horn blast rent the air. Cody scrambled back up to the top of the outcropping, his feet kicking up grit. He reached the top and turned back to them.
The slavers! They're under attack!
As one, they followed Cody, stretched out flat on the rock next to him, and watched the drama unfold. As Cody had described, the wagon pulled by oxen was making its way through the valley, children chained together in 3 dog lines behind it. The children were not evenly spaced, but rather older ones carried younger ones who had grown too weak to march. One line was folded in a V as children at the ends dragged one child who looked to be dead. Why the slave masters had simply not unchained the body, Haille could not guess, unless it was meant as some lesson or the extra weight of punishment for the other children. The driver had pulled up on the oxen, bringing the cart to a stop while the slavers fanned out to either side. 9 riders, young riders that looked to be children themselves, approached on ponies from the north end of the valley. They carried swords and shields and beat one upon the other, raising up a clatter that echoed between the ridges. 8 more sprung from the trees in the south end of the valley, but they rode without announcing themselves. At their fore was a red-clad rider on a white pony, her blonde hair waving behind her like a war banner. "By the stars above," Cody said. The slavers formed a line in front of the oxen to face the approaching riders. Off to the side of the road, the turf sprung to life as more children leapt up from the grasses, wearing cloaks of woven reeds and tree cuttings. They knocked arrows to their bows and let fly into the slavers' numbers. 2 fell, arrows sprouting from their legs. The riders from the front closed in and used the confusion and their mounts to their advantage. The riders from the south swept over the children, shattered their chains, and formed a protective circle around them. All except the Red Rider. She leapt from her mount, ran across the roof of the cart, her footsteps thudding like mallets on a great drum, and in a flash of steel drew her sword. With a single swing she took off the head of the driver. It bounced like a melon off the bench, knocking into the hindquarters of the oxen before coming to rest in a spreading puddle at the roadside. All but one of the slavers had been cut down, the children proving to be cruel victors, stabbing their enemies repeatedly after they had fallen. "He's escaping!" one called out to the girl on top of the cart. One slaver was indeed sprinting for the cover of the forest. The girl signaled to one of the children, who tossed her his quiver and bow. She knocked back an arrow and took aim. "No way she can reach him," Cody said. "Out of range," confirmed Val. But the girl released. The arrow soared in a long, curving path that seemed never to reach its apex. The slaver was sure to escape, closing as he was on the edge of the forest. Then the arrow tipped downward, and as if guided by an invisible hand, it dropped straight into place in the slaver's back. "I've never," Cody said. "That was extraordinary," Katlyn said. "That could only be one person," Haille said, getting to his feet. "Avenger Red." He stood upon the rock, silhouetting himself against the sky, but he did not care if he gave away their position now. Instead, he slipped over the edge of the outcropping, brushing up flakes of lichens and kicking up scree, all the while calling out, "Avenger Red! Scourge of slavers! Hero to the oppressed! We come as friends!" He felt as if his heart had skipped a beat. His palms were sweaty. Haille had been in the presence of kings, queens, and council elders, but none had stirred him like the sight of Avenger Red. This was coming face to face with a legend, a ghost, a real-to-life myth. How many times had he heard of her exploits on behalf of enslaved children and to the consternation of vile slavers? In a land far from the justice of the city, she was justice, in her own merciless way. She was already crossing the field to where the slaver lay dying when she picked Haille out as he lunged and stumbled down the scree slope. She placed a second arrow in her bow, but did not knock it back, although 2 of the children in grass cloaks did and raced out to flank her. Haille stopped on the edge of the field, just short of the slaver who had gone still, the arrow shaft sticking out just below his neck. Haille could hear Val, Cody, and Katlyn riding down the slope to catch up with him. After so many travails, luck had finally shone her beautiful face on them. "Who are you?" the girl he took to be Avenger Red asked. Closer, Haille could see she was in her teens, but even for a young woman she was small. Nothing in her dress, however, singled her out as female. She wore riding breeches, sleeveless ringmail, and a form-fitting red tunic. Haille's mind raced. It was too soon for the truth. He reached for their assumed identities. "I am Derek, of Antis. My companions and I were on our way to Rivertown. We were set upon by bandits but escaped. We've been keeping off the main road since." The 2 children to either side of her had hardened faces. They were haunting to look at, for they lacked the softness Haille would have expected in most children. Perhaps as killers they had completely surrendered some part of their childhood innocence. Their eyes, as they looked down their arrow shafts at him, were flat, empty, dead. "You are Avenger Red, aren't you?" Haille said, more a statement than a question. "Depends on who is doing the asking. To city dwellers I am a vigilante. Not to all. To many you are a hero," Haille said, his breath coming short. Val, Cody, and Katlyn rode up behind him. Val wore an expression that looked as if he had just swallowed sour milk. Haille imagined the knight was not pleased with his impulsiveness. Red betrayed no sense of warmth on her side either. Deep frowning lines bracketed the corners of her mouth. The skin around her eyes was crinkled, and her eyes were tight, as if she were looking into the sun. There were more lines in her face than Haille would have expected of her years, but he attributed it to the many troubles she had seen, the harsh justice she had been forced to mete out. "An unexpected lot if I ever saw one," she said, looking from Val to Cody, then lingering on Katlyn, who sat on the elk, gripping its mane in her fists. "Elk Riders! This world is full of wonders." She lowered her bow, walked the length of them, coming to the last elk, and tapped its antlers with the end of her bow. It made a meadow-like tink-tink. The elk breathed in a deep breath, then huffed and hissed at Red, kicking the ground with its front hoof. "Humph," Red said, backing away. She motioned to the archers, and they relaxed their bowstrings. "Bound for Rivertown, you said?" "Yes," Haille answered, looking to the others, willing them to follow his lead. Didn't they realize they were in the presence of a legendary hero? "The Eastlands can be dangerous. We march eastward from here with our newly freed children. You're welcome to join us, once we attend to some business." She strode up to the body of the slaver, yanked out the arrow, and stabbed him through the chest to make sure he was dead. She wiped her sword on his tunic. Haille thanked her, expressing his gratitude even after she turned her back and stalked up to the wagon. The two grass-cloaked children lingered a while, studying the four of them before searching the body, removing any coins and jewelry that they found. Once they had left to follow Red, Haille turned to the others. "You've heard of her, haven't you?" "Yes," Val said. "But if you ever endanger us by giving away our position to strangers again—" "She's not a stranger. I knew who she was." "You got lucky this time," Val said. "I'd say we got lucky," Cody said. "Did you see how she dropped that slaver?" "Don't you start acting enamored," Val said. "She's a butcher." He steadied his horse as a crow landing on the dead body startled it. More of the scavengers followed. "He doesn't like her," Katlyn said, patting the elk on the neck. Haille blew the hair off his forehead and smoothed it back with his hand. "What do we care what an elk thinks?" The business Red had to attend to was no small matter. Her comrades had broken the chain gang of children loose of the wagon. The freed children had wide eyes, either from relief or terror. Already the older ones were tending to the younger ones. All of them bore the marks of abuse, welts from whips, bruises, and the emaciated frames of the starved. They gathered in a tight knot. Red's people handed out flatbread and placed water skins among them. Cody and Val dismounted and shared some of their water with them as well. The wagon itself was still sealed. It was wood on all sides with barred windows and a door with a heavy latch on the back. Two of Red's boys peered inside and promptly ducked away. "It's full of children, small ones, but Quentin Stills is in there too," one said. "A master slave trader," Red said by way of explanation to Haille and the others. "Shall we break him out?" Val asked from the ground where he knelt next to a cowering girl. "No," Red said. "Pile grass and wood beneath the wagon. We'll burn him out." "But the children inside," Val protested. Red, for all her 14 or 15 years, was unperturbed by his objection, turning her face and shoulders away from him. This was her battlefield. "You are here by my leave. Don't presume to order me. These are lawless lands, and we deal with lawbreakers in our own way. The law is enforced when men choose to follow it. I am no man," she said, "and neither is Quentin Stills. He's a worm." Red's fighters pulled up armfuls of grass from the meadow while others brought kindling from the forest. They made a great nest of firewood around the wagon, piling it as high as the wheels. "You hear us outside, Quentin? We're going to roast you like the pig you are," Red cried out. A high-pitched voice warbled back. "I have children in here with me. I'll slay them one by one." "You are more likely to rape them, Quentin. But I won't give you time. I consider them lost already. I've saved enough out here for a day's work." "You're mad!" One of her fighters was striking a flint and chip next to the base of the grasses. He cupped his hand around a weak flame and blew on it to give it life. "That is not news to anyone," Red mumbled as the tongues of fire spread among the grass and the kindling began to crackle. Dark curds of smoke wound about the wagon, and Quentin pressed his face up against the bars on the window. Red had been right. It was round, and with an upturned nose he looked nothing short of porcine. "You can have 'em all," he said in a rushed voice. "Just let me live. I've already told you they are dead to me, just like you. The fire spread and the wood began to hiss. Haille could hear the children inside coughing. Even at a distance he could feel the heat on his face. The air around the wagon shimmered. He could only imagine what those within were feeling. Some of the boards were turning black and beginning to scale. More crows began to circle in the sky and the just-released children began to cry. Red looked at her nails.
You kill them!
Quentin said between coughs. The wheels were fully engulfed. Val rushed forward to Red's side. This is barbaric. Check yourself, old man, Red growled, her hand on her sword. 3 sets of bow and arrows were swiftly aimed at Val from Red's fighters. Red played with the string on her own bow, twanging it without rhythm to a melody only she could hear. Her fighters remained rooted in place, their arrows trained on the wagon, on Val, and even the children they had freed who were standing, their eyes pleading with their very own rescuers, turned executioners. The grease on the axles was burning with a bright yellow flame. The wagon began to rock and shake. Red drew an arrow casually from her quiver as the lock on the door clicked. Suddenly the door burst open and a fleshy man in sateen robes spilled out. His face was red, his temples and hair blackened with soot. His eyes watered and he staggered as if drunk. Children poured out of the wagon after him, leaping over the flames. Quentin dragged a brunette girl, no older than 4, by the hair alongside him. She was wailing, her soft face covered in tears and soot. Quentin placed a bone-handled knife to her neck.
I'll kill her! Let me go or I'll kill her!
She was tiny next to him, her head barely as high as his belt buckle. Red drew back the string on her bow and closed one eye. Quentin, you should have picked a taller child. She let the arrow fly and it embedded itself in the slaver's left eye socket. He let go of the girl and lifted his hand to his face. Red handed the bow to one of her fighters, walked through the grass, and drew her sword. Quentin stumbled to escape, his legs kicking and tangling in his own robes. He came close to brushing up against Haille, but Haille stepped out of his reach. Red came alongside him, yanked out the arrow in a spray of viscous fluid, causing Quentin to cry out again. The fire was roaring now, and Quentin was whimpering. Red took a fistful of his hair and growled in his ear. This is what happens when you compete with me. Her first hack severed most of the soft flesh and tendons of his neck. She sawed through his spine with a few thrusts. The weight of the body stretched and snapped any sinews left. Red sneered at the head in her hands before dropping it to the ground with a thud. Katlyn vomited. Even Cody looked green. The corners of Val's mouth were turned downward in disgust. The fighters had put away their weapons and were gathering the children in 2 rows, older children paired with younger ones. Let that be a lesson to you as new friends, Red said, the column of smoke eclipsing the sun and the fire casting her in a red glow. Don't ever question my methods again.